want to talk about tariffs today. Now, you've probably read a lot about tariffs and heard a lot about tariffs, but I thought I'd add my 2 cents because I have a little bit of a different spin on it, what's going to unfold later on. Now, as a disclaimer, right up front, I don't want to talk really about politics. It's a little bit hard to avoid in this particular subject, but I'm not part of the red tribe. I'm not part of the blue tribe. I look at things issue by issue. And so, yes, Trump will probably come up. But I might say some bad things about Trump and some good things about Trump. Let's not weigh that out, but in this particular situation, I will try and take a look at both sides. And in Canada, I won't mention any political names. I'll just talk about it generically as much as possible. Now, first of all, I believe that tariffs are not a good idea in general. And what Trump is doing with the tariffs is not a great standpoint. So tariffs are not good because it takes away from free trade. Free trade allows each country to have a comparative advantage. And that is basically, if one country's better at making something, they should specialize in that. And another country's better at making something else, they should specialize in that and then trade. And we're all better off. That's globalization. I mean, there may be some downfalls for it, but we're all better off collectively. And tariffs take away from that and hurt different the countries. Now, there are some exceptions to that. There's 2 exceptions. The first one is national security. So, for instance, something like uranium. You need uranium to power nuclear plants. So, I get it. You want to be able to control that. Or pharmaceutical products or computer chips. Tariffs make sense in that case. And the other one would be that if another country was dumping product into your country. Dumping is an economic term where a country sells their products into another country below their production costs. And universally, economists agree this should not be allowed. So tariffs in that sense also make sense. So what Trump is doing though with this 25% tariff that he tried to introduce last Monday, and then he put a pause on for Canada and Mexico. I don't think this is the right way to approach it. Now, the U.S., I will say, has been disadvantaged in world trade with tariffs. For example, China has all sorts of trade barriers. Japan, the same thing. India, absolutely mammoth trade barriers and tariffs for the U.S. Europe. Why should Europe have a 10% tariff on all U.S. cars going into Europe? The U.S. has a 2.5% tariff on European cars. That makes no sense. So I get trying to level out the playing field. I know when I was a kid, when we used to go to Europe, I'd see the Ford cars. They weren't the most popular car, but I see quite a few of them. You don't see any today, and that's partly because of the tariffs in place. So I don't blame Trump for trying to level the playing field. I really don't. Canada has tariffs on the States as well on certain products. For instance, dairy, we could talk about the cultural implications of that. But we have a 250% to 300% tariff. Oh, just as a side note, it was just a few months ago that Canada put 100% tariffs on China, on their EV cars. Now, they were forced into it because the U.S. did it first. And we have the Auto Pact, basically, or the UMCA, the trade agreement, so we sort of had to go along with it. But there was no reason for that. I researched all the reports looking for, were they dumping their cars into North America? Now, they're not here yet. But they have been starting to make their way into Europe. And the cars are, like, technologically way more advanced than what we have here in North America. And they're producing them much faster. So in other words, they're better at making these cars than we are right now. We've slacked off. And so should they be punished because they're doing something better? But so Canada slapped on a 100% tariff, and really nobody complained. So I looked and said, are they dumping the products? Are they bringing them in here, selling below cost? Well, they're not even really here. But why did we do the tariff? It was really just say, hey, we want to protect our industry. So Canada does have some of these tariffs as well. That makes no sense. Now, what we saw last Monday on February the 3rd was the tariffs were supposed to come into play for Canada and Mexico, 25% and 10% on energy. And then, we saw all the politicians in Canada up in arms, talking about crazy stuff like, let's cut off their electricity so their houses go dark, or let's cut off their oil. They didn't realize that for Central and Eastern Canada, a lot of the oil actually from the West gets routed through the States first. We cut off their oil, they cut off ours. It's just insane stuff. And this isn't the way to go about trying to solve this situation. Yes, we should put on retaliatory tariffs, dollar for dollar. But to thump your chest and go, we should be doing this, I can take Trump on, I'm better at this, I can have a fight. This isn't a worldwide wrestling match here. This isn't the way to deal with it. It's divisive, counterproductive, and it's really distracting from the issue. So Trump is really focused on, with Canada and Mexico, on the fentanyl trade. Now, a lot of people say, well, that's just an excuse. He really just wants to put this on us. Now, first of all, I do want to come back to something else, and that is that Trump has said that he wants at some point to have America supported with external revenue, which is tariffs, versus internal revenue, which is taxes. And that's impossible to happen. Okay, like Trump's going to say this stuff. He is. That's just the way it is. I was on BNN Bloomberg last week, and I was interviewing Doyle from McGuire Securities, and we were talking about this issue, and he pointed out that it's just mathematically impossible to actually get external revenue from tariffs to support the country. It just doesn't work. It can't work. So it'll never happen. But I still think we're going to end up with some tariffs in Canada and Mexico and in other countries as well. But they're going to be a little bit different than what we got going on today. So we should deal with this situation. We should call Trump's bluff, by the way. Why not? He's talking about fentanyl. A lot of our politicians have made comments, well, we just have a little bit of fentanyl going into the States compared to Mexico. What's the big issue? We don't have a problem. And Canada is such a great country. It's got so full of people. We don't know how big the problem is with criminal gangs, international criminal gangs in Canada, and the money laundering that goes on in Canada. So Trump isn't talking about necessarily like at the Detroit-Windsor border, people taking fentanyl across. That's part of it. But he's talking about the whole money laundering. Canada is actually one of the top money laundering countries in the world. Yeah, we don't realize that because it's such a nice nation. But we just have these criminal gangs for a number of reasons, through corruption, through laws that really are not enforced or way too weak to discourage activities. But so we do have a problem. And so the politicians talk about, well, they had a 43-pound bag of fentanyl caught at the border. That's nothing. Okay, first of all, at a 2-milligram death dose, that's more than enough to kill 10 million people. Okay, quarter of the population of Canada. Yeah, okay. And we're also really good at shipping drugs in trucks that don't get caught. Probably much better at it than across the south border. So just talking about that 43 pounds, kind of a misnomer. And most people don't know this, but it wasn't that long ago that we saw a bust in British Columbia of the world's biggest drug lab. Yes, you heard that right. The world's biggest drug lab. That would make Breaking Bad look like kindergarten. Breaking Canada, I guess. But yeah, we're huge. We got the precursors coming in from China. Got to shut that down. 80% of them are totally legal. So, and they seem to get in. There's really not a lot of consequence going on. So yes, we have a problem. We have to admit the first step to solving the problem is admitting we have a problem. But successive governments, it doesn't matter if it's conservative or liberal, they both over time have really just put this underneath the carpet and, not really dealt with the problem. Made small iterative changes. Look what we're doing, but they really haven't solved the situation. And that's a problem. So we need to admit that we have a problem. Why not? We, as a country, Canada needs to get this thing solved. Vancouver, there's something called the Vancouver model. And it's basically referred to around the world as a procedure to money launder through casinos and real estate. That's Canada. Yes, that's insane. We need to solve that. So why not solve the border crisis? Make some real active steps to that. We'd be much, much better off for that. And yeah, so Trump may come out and still try and do tariffs. Yeah, I get it. But why not do this anyhow? I want a better border than what we've got. Crime to be more enforced, or better, more serious charges. Right now we have a 30-day pause on tariffs. And what we saw last Monday was we saw the markets go down initially. And then we saw the markets respond positively when Mexico got the pause. And they thought, oh, okay, well, Canada did the same thing. And then it was like nothing ever happened. Like they thought, well, this is just Trump's bargaining tool here, and there's going to be no tariffs in the end. And I think that's a mistake. I think there will be tariffs. They're going to be different than what we see right now. We do have that pause on. And I think that Trump's going to come back in 30 days, and there'll probably be an extension. More talks. I don't think he's coming back. Oh, look at that, 30 days, there's going to be no tariffs. It's not going to happen. I can't see that happening. Maybe it does, but I can't see it. So maybe get an extension. And then maybe there's another extension as well. But at some point, Trump's going to come back and go, well, you know what? There hasn't been enough progress on some of these issues. And, we're going to move forward with tariffs. He's also talking about retaliatory tariffs right now with Europe. And I think that's the way the model is going to go, which sort of makes a little bit of sense. Looking at things like cars, hey, you tariffing us at 10%, we're going to start going above that, until you lower your tariffs or something. So I think there's going to be more than that, rather than these big blanket 25% tariffs, just because they're a little bit hard to manage. Maybe over time there might be more tariffs added, but I think it's going to be a little more gradual. But I do believe we will have tariffs at some point. Maybe they're 5%, maybe they're more specific. Trump on the weekend mentioned tariffs on steel and aluminum coming from Mexico and Canada and other countries. And that's probably the way it's going to go. It's going to be more isolated as far as that goes. Now, I think it's kind of crazy, to be honest. He talks about Canada. They have a $200 billion deficit with Canada as far as trade goes, because it's because of the oil. Now, it's not like these are fine watches we're shipping to the States that require a lot of labor and service, etc. This is just stuff we take out of the ground and then ship to the States, and sell it to them at a discount, because we've trapped ourselves into not being able to sell it to international markets. Kind of crazy. Now, I gotta say, I want to say that Stephen Poloz was on being interviewed the other day, and he was talking about, and he's a former governor of the Bank of Canada, and he was talking about the fact that Canada is hurting themselves. And this has been going on for decades with interprovincial trade barriers. It's kind of crazy that we actually have a country still today that has trade barriers. Did you know that it's illegal to take a case of beer, a 24 case of beer, from Quebec in your car and drive it to New Brunswick? It's totally illegal, and people get tickets for it. How is that possible in today's world? It's not just the case of beer. Well, if you take a look at the cost of making beer in Canada, I don't drink so much beer, but a long time ago on the bottles, it used to say, made in Winnipeg, made in Toronto, made in Montreal, made in Vancouver. And you go, why are they made in all these different provinces? Because every province would say to the beer company, if you want to sell your beer here, you're going to have to make your beer here. And so, totally inefficient, totally crazy. But this is what we're up against. Stephen Poloz was talking about this, and he said that's costing Canada 4% GDP per year. That's insane. That's a huge amount. Why wouldn't we fix this problem? We haven't fixed the problem for decades with both sets of governments. This is why we shouldn't be distracted trying to talk about cutting off energy to Trump. Let's focus on solving some of the problems here. Let's create an infrastructure from west to east, going all the way across so we can move energy. Let's take away the trade barriers. Now, these things are going to take a long time. These don't just all of a sudden get done. But let's start. And let's deal with Trump. This isn't about trying to stand up to politicians right now and trying to enter into a wrestling match with Trump to say, look, I can take Trump on. I'm a good politician. That's to me, that's kind of embarrassing. But a number of politicians are all doing the same thing. And Trump's talking about, Canada being the 51st state. Our politicians are going, there's no way he's going to make us the 51st state. No, I'm not. I'm going to stand up to Trump. Okay, come on. Norway wants us to be also part of their country. Greenland would love us to be part of their country. Everybody would. Europe would love us to. It doesn't mean it's going to happen. There's no way it will happen. So why get distracted on something that won't happen, ever? So why say, that's because the politicians want to look tough. Like, look at me. I can do this. I can go into that ring and look, you should make me. I'm the best politician around. And they're saying crazy stuff like, well, also with the tariffs, we should put 100% tariffs on Teslas. What? Because of Elon Musk. What does Elon Musk have to do with tariffs? This is politicians right now. They're all trying to use this to their advantage just to show how tough they are. Really, we should follow China's model and basically say, hey, here's a date you put your tariffs on. This is the date. This is what we're going to tariff as well. And just do it, okay? Like this evening, I'm walking in Bronte Park in Oakville. And this trail that I'm walking on is actually... there's a lot of memories for me. I actually cut this trail years ago when I used to mountain bike, and I was looking for a place to mountain bike before it was a park. And you can see it has a beautiful river valley down there. Absolutely gorgeous. Now it's become a park, Bronte Provincial Park, and they maintain the trail, and it's quite nice. I haven't actually taken my mountain bike on this in a few years. But it's beautiful to get out and enjoy a nice, beautiful evening with a nice, crisp winter air. And I'm able to wear a sweater my wife made for me many years ago. This is actually the first sweater that she made me, hand knitted, when we were dating. I won't tell you how long ago that was. It was a long time ago. So where do I think we'll end up with the tariffs? Let's talk about the economy in Canada and the stock market as well. Because right now the narrative and the general belief is that the tariffs probably aren't going to take place. They're going to be put on pause a little bit. Nobody really seems to be taking it with any real seriousness. Yeah, they're showing on the news, this is going to affect this industry, etc. But there seems to be a lack of seriousness, and I think that will change. The best way to think about this is it's like a decaying of time value for an option. And as you get closer to the expiry date for the option, then what takes place is it decays more and more, so faster and faster, and then basically goes to zero. I think that's what's will happen with the tariffs. As we get closer and closer to the date for the tariffs to be implemented, all of a sudden people are starting to get serious and go, whoa, this is actually happening. I didn't believe it would. And then they'll discuss that. Now, how will that impact Canada? And I do believe we could see a pause or even two pauses, but I still think the tariffs are going to be coming. I don't think it's good for anybody. I think it's not good for Canada. I don't think it's good for the US. I think it's not good for anybody. So, the Canadian economy from that will suffer. Now, the US economy will suffer a lot less. It's hard for us to hurt the US economy. So we're sort of shooting ourselves in the foot a little bit. And that's why this rhetoric doesn't make sense. And I think it's going to have an impact. We're going to see a slowing of the economy in Canada. Now, that probably is already taking place right now. If we start to see more further slowing, unemployment would increase, and then it might affect housing prices and so on. So yes, it could have an impact on the economy, and the stock market consequently as well. So yeah, I do think it would have an impact. Currency-wise, here we are trading back and forth, 69 cents to 70 cents as far as the US dollar goes in Canadian terms. And right now, what we saw last week was that the Canadian dollar dropped when the tariffs were supposed to be implemented. And then it popped right back up again when they were paused. Like nothing happened. I do think if the tariffs actually start rolling forward, I do think the US dollar Canadian dollar, I should say, is probably going to weaken relative to the US dollar. So I don't think it's a good thing. I think the tariffs, I don't agree with them. I'm really not a big fan of any tariffs, except for in those two situations I talked about earlier, national security and when you're fighting against dumping of products goes. But I do think that they will come. We will see an impact on the economy in all the countries as we fight back and forth, and possibly that would roll back into the stock market as well. I don't think we're at the point where the investors are saying this is a real concern. But as I said, as investors, we have to watch for that to start to take place as the tariffs start to get closer as far as implementation dates, and then the reality starts to sink in. So I do think that there will be a negative impact that will take place on the economy and the markets. Perhaps it's a couple months from now or a few months from now. But overall, it's not a good situation. Thank you very much for joining me today.